Hello, everyone. I just realized I'm just starting the live and I'm realizing that I have not set the link in one of the most important places for me to set the link. So I'm starting really badly already. Hold on a second. Sorry, everyone. Hi, if you're already here, edit this here. All the events. Sorry, I have this inside of the naturally conscious community. For those of you who know what today's being a really hard day. Is Mercury in retrograde or something? Because I am having all the dickens of a time editing and doing a bunch of stuff that I need to do. Okay, I'm going to do this and then I should have done it before I started. All right, this is going to be a do-over. Let's pretend that didn't happen. Hello. I have a feeling that my Wi-Fi is really bad today. I know I should plug in, but I can't where I live. So Wi-Fi it is. Welcome back to another episode of Plant Consciousness Commentary. Oh, it is so Friday. Although for me it's Friday, but it's kind of doesn't mean anything because I have a group of students from the Davenport School of Method Action here. And we have had very, very, very busy days. Today, they're building their statues, which is a whole super interesting thing. And so therefore, I've had a little bit of time off, but really not enough. And my mind is, it's filled. It's filled. So if you're new around here, hello, and welcome. My name is Tigrilla. I am a nature-inspired mentor and a certified life coach. I'm also the founder of the Naturally Conscious Community, the only online platform or the premier online platform for plant-human relations and world ambassador for plant advocacy. Pretty much for more than a decade, I've been working closely with plants to share their practical wisdom with you and to consciously embody the elements of life that nourish you to flourish. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So today we are going to be talking all things plants. So if you've never been to one of these before, buckle up. We're going to have some fun. We have a really great paper today. My time is a little bit limited, but because I got my students that I have to deal with, but I will make it work and I will make it worthwhile. And if you'd like to go see some of the previous commentary and see all of these, they're in YouTube in their own playlist. That's the word I'm looking for, under live also. And also on the Naturally Conscious Community, you can see all the show notes and everything that I write up about it in tigrillagardenia.com/commentary. So that's kind of all of the intro for you to have about what it is that we are, what are we doing, and what's going on around here. Like I said, it's been a bit of a crazy week because I have these students here. They're from all over the world, Slovenia, Croatia, the United Kingdom, the United States, and we've been having a lot of fun just really digging into what it means to be an initiate of this beautiful esoteric school and to spend time in community again. So it's been really great. I have not been neglecting the Naturally Conscious Community, though, and I have been coming every day and just checking in, seeing how things are. I'm loving some of the conversations that we're having over there. They very much tie into just many of the aspects of what I've been exploring right now with everything that's going on in the world. So next week's podcast episode also is going to touch on those topics. It's a bit of a more intimate look into my world and into where I am right now and how that affects the world at large and how, hopefully it can help you and how we want to process some of this stuff together. But today, that's not what we're going to be doing. Today, we are talking about a paper that I'm really excited actually to share with you because one of the authors is somebody I actually personally met. She came many years ago to Davenport to take a class with me, which was really fun. She came, I was teaching communication with the plant world here in Davenport, and she came to take that class. Her name is Christy Onzik. She at the time was doing her PhD. She has since completed her PhD. Congratulations, Christy. We also read Christy's work on passion flower when we read the book, The Mind of Plants, in the Plant Wisdom Book Club. So Christy is a voice that actually we do know. And then this is a paper that she wrote with Monica Galliano. I bumped into Christy in Florence when she was on her way there. Remember, I did my master's with Stefano Mancuso in the laboratory, the International Laboratory for Plant Neurobiology, and she was on her way there to actually work with Mancuso in the laboratory. She also then went to Australia to work with Monica Galliano in her laboratory. So this is a paper that comes from that work together. Now, Monica Galliano, as you know, is a former marine biologist turned plant cognition pioneer. And she's the one that's really pushing for the idea of plant cognition and of thinking and working with plants in a completely different way that's not about dissection, but more about observation and about really trying to get into the plant mind. And Christy is actually an anthropologist, and her anthropology was on the history and the sort of birth of plant neurobiology. She has really fascinating ways of looking at this. So I'm excited to read this paper that is between both of them. The paper is actually came out in Catalyst. We have read a paper before from Catalyst. Catalyst is Feminism, Theory, and Technoscience. So it's not really the normal types of journals that we cover, but we have read a few papers from them, especially there was one that really went deeper into this concept of how working with plants helps us better understand feminism. So this paper, which is again called Feeling Around the Apparatus, a Radicley, get it? Radicley, Empirical Plant Science. And I think that's really exciting. So this paper came out in 2022. Hold on, I lost my cursor. Where is my cursor? Hello, cursor. I don't know where my cursor is. Okay, my cursor is not working. I am resetting my mouse to see what I'm telling you. If Mercury is not in retrograde, I don't know what's going on. Okay, so we're going to get into this paper because I'm really excited about understanding what it is that they were working on together and what they've been able. I know they worked together on the book The Mind of Plants, but this is, you know, a different sort of angle on it. So let me change the view here, give us a little view that makes things a little easier. So by the way, hopefully I explained that in our plant consciousness commentary, we literally go over plant papers. That's the whole point of this, is to go through these plant papers and really get into them and understand them from the perspective of, you know, a wider perspective. When you read them from a scientific perspective, you obviously are limited by that view. We here look at that and we try to extrapolate from that into artistic realms and spiritual realms and, you know, different realms of understanding. And how do we bring what it is that we're learning about plants and about this way of looking at plants, and how do we bring that into our daily life? Because this really helps us expand ourselves as humans and our consciousness and our perceptions and such. So some papers are going to be really scientific and really detailed and more like an actual study that was done. Some of them are going to be more opinion pieces. They're all in the realm of plant consciousness and plant behaviors and plant neurobiology and all these different things. As you can see when you go into plant consciousness commentary on my website, tigriagardenia.com/commentary. And so that's why I'm really excited about reading this paper, because I think this is we've been doing a few really technical papers that are much more about the behavior of plants and how do we understand and extrapolate from there. And this is going to be a little bit kind of more abstract and more understanding how this affects overall the way we live rather than the way the plant does a specific thing. But we'll find out, I guess, when we get into it. Okay, so here's the abstract. Scientists are oft trained to think that feeling is not simply irrelevant, but antithetical to the methodologies. Remember when we talk about feeling, right? We talk about plants in reference to them sensing. So we know that plants sense. They sense their environment, they understand, but feeling is usually relegated to the idea of having feelings and therefore consciousness. And since plants from a scientific perspective do not have consciousness, then they don't have feelings. So obviously it's important. And if we want to carry out studies in the way that we've been doing studies, We don't even want to think of plants as conscious, because by thinking of them as conscious, we have to take them into consideration. And then therefore we can't just dissect them however we want. We can't rip them out of the ground. We can't plant them whenever we want and then kill them. We can't do any of those types of things that we as humans regularly do when it comes to plants, whether it's my houseplant getting a little ugly and so therefore I just throw the houseplant away. None of you will go through that. Don't worry. Or whether we're talking about our furniture or our clothing or anything. Plants are, even though they're living and breathing, we consider them pretty expendable. And in the scientific world, if we're going to study them, even more so. I mean, there's a lot of animals that are still considered that way. Fish and mice and, all of these different animals, especially insects. I mean, we ourselves kill off insects most of the time. So there's lots of these layers that we're only starting to step into deeper right now. And they're not easy. They're not easy to understand. I always talk about this. So that scientists are not simply objectively trained minds, but also bodies that feel has been an important feminist contribution towards reimagining scientific knowledge, not as the product of self-directed theological discovery, but as situated in time, place, and transformed through relations that oft exceed the binary logics of scientific representation. Those founded upon rationalist distinctions between feeling, knowing, body, mind, object, subject. Through a collaborative methodological lens, we, ethnographer and scientists, remember I told you that Christy is ethnographer, anthropologist, I believe, and then Monica Galliano is a marine biologist, scientist, plant cognition, are calling radical empiricism. We ask how a scientist comes to make sense of feeling and knowing and the relations between throughout shifting configurations of a pea plant decision-making apparatus. By focusing this study at the level of the apparatus, we provide an empirically based description, not a proposed model or theory, of some of the material discursive relations through which the concepts of feeling and knowing are reconfigured through a scientist's unexpected encounters with pea plant root tips or radicals. As such, we offer a perspective that does not assume feeling or knowing as distinct categories of a scientific knowledge-making endeavors, nor as categories of experience that function independently of the historical, societal, and material conditions through which they are made perceptible. Imminent to this description is an invitation to explore creative and collaborative practices of science making in which the phenomenon we study, whether pea plants or other persons, have the opportunity to reformulate not only our categories of feeling and knowing, but the conditions through which they are made possible. Okay, so this is definitely going to be in the world of critical plant studies and plant cognition, and it's most likely going to be, it sounds like, really helping us reframe the way that we think about plants, or using plants to help us reframe the way we think about non-human persons. This is going to be a tricky one, so let's see where they go with this. Introduction. In A Feeling for the Organism, historian of science Evelyn Fox Keller details the life and work of Nobel Prize-winning scientist Barbara McClintock. Though it wasn't until the end of her career that McClintock became famous for her discovery of genetic transposition in corn, she was long made infamous among her colleagues for the incoherence of her scientific reasoning. Despite her perceived lack of appreciation for the institutionalized norms of scientific communication, she was accepted by her male colleagues as a hard worker and nonetheless had what it takes to be a committed researcher in the nascent field of genetic science. The molecular techniques that came to define genetic science and later biological life itself in the mid-20th century were still being developed, and McClintock's studies of genetic inheritance were yet to be inhibited by disciplinary expectations, which is a big thing that happens nowadays. We have these we talk about expectations and conditioning all over the place. It's no different in science. If anything, it's exasperated there. Though she shared with her colleagues a desire to reveal the lawful patterns of natural organization, she did not share, nor was she afforded the same opportunities to share, the power to isolate her discoveries to the objective coordinates of the experiment itself. Such narratives of discovery are often reserved for a scientist's Nobel Prize-winning speech or autobiography, articulated in the same sensational language of eureka or aha moments. in which the missing piece of an experimental objective was suddenly received by the unassuming mind of the scientist. For example, while riding in a streetcar in Bern, Einstein recalls tapping into God's thoughts as the theory of relativity suddenly hit him as a storm that broke loose in his mind. The ring structure of benzene arrived in a dream to Kekulé, in which a snake appeared to be eating its own tail. And while in a cinema, Francois Jacob was jolted as though a line of fire cut through the darkness by the glare of evidence into the nature of gene regulation. These are stories that describe insight as instantaneous, decisive, and external to the normal processes of science, as the miraculous effects of a scientist's mind making a brief foray into the realm of mystical or subjective experience, only to return to the laboratory with visions of an apparatus whole and complete in its objectively discernible performance. The story of McClintock's discovery as both she, by the way, this is one of those things, if you remember when we were doing Natasha Meyer's paper, we talked in detail about the fact, or Natasha Myers talks in detail about the fact that she was studying and trying to understand from younger scientists and older scientists, how much do they really listen to the plants that they're working with, the subjects of their experiments? And of course, all the younger ones were like, absolutely not, you know, I use a scientific method, blah, blah, blah. Where the older ones would start conceding that it's almost as if you get the whispers of the plants to a certain extent. And I think that this is the same aspect. They reserve all of these types of eureka moments to the actual acceptance speech, because if they were to put them into the paper, then it's almost as if the paper wouldn't be approved. We do not yet, as a general society, accept the fact that intuition can come from many forms. And that intuition in and of itself is not just my mind processing data that probably has come in there, but also intuition comes from connection to a divine entity, connection to the more than human world, an understanding of the entanglement that we have with other types of beings, both physical as well as subtle. And those are things that we still can't put into the papers, even though we experience them. And so I do appreciate that, you know, they're already bringing this to the surface of the fact that most scientists will talk about this after they've received the big award, after their big discovery has been accepted, after there is scientific acceptance for what it is that they've created. Then they can go into the almost non-conscious states, including relations with other kin, in order to have gotten there. That you can't really reach that only with what is in the human process. We need our relationships in order to get there. I don't think that many people are speaking about it so directly. Even Monica Galliano, I was just talking to a scientist 2 weeks ago who was telling me that in some ways, Monica putting that into her book, Thus Spoke the Plant, those types of connections with the plants that whisper to her the direction to go, was in some ways career suicide. In other words, it was almost discrediting her work. But it's true to who she is and what it is that she's trying to accomplish, that she wants to bring plants into the process. And what we want to get to is the time when all of us can do this, where we can take a moment and reach out to kin and get that feedback and have those relationships, similar to myself with Noel the Christmas cactus or spider plant, sharing with me information that eventually becomes part of my business model. So I'm glad that they're just really calling it out. The story of McClintock's discovery, excuse me, I have a little bit of a tickle in my throat, and so I'll probably be stopping more than normal to drink. The story of McClintock's discovery, as both she and Keller tell it, was markedly different. McClintock's desire to know the process through which corn kernels inherit their particular organizations developed through years of losing herself in the subtle variations of the corn she had planted, of spending long hours with each individual plant throughout their development, informing in her an ability for direct communication. Rock on for saying it. Rock on. What her colleagues understood to be irrational vision and poor scientific description were, for McClintock, the effable findings of a reverence and commitment to listening to the material itself, key self. A knowing made possible through years of cultivating a feeling for the organism. It was only after McClintock had long been dismissed into the margins of scientific rationality and molecular scale technologies later developed that her colleagues could bear witness to the vision she had spent the majority of her career trying to translate into language of objective reason. And I love that they are calling this out on a scientific paper, because especially this last piece of she spent the majority of her career trying to translate into the language. You know that whenever you've done any kind of program with me, I tell you time and time again, capture everything that arrives in whatever form you can, not necessarily just through words. Draw, feel, dance, move, anything that allows you to give a permanence to that vision, to that feeling, to that understanding that's coming in. It is not always going to come through the written word or the spoken word. So give yourself space to live it, embody it, and feel it. Only now, there are many things that right now, this year, and the latter part of this year especially, have coalesced into a wonderful vision and explanation. Things that I've been working on for years. As you know, I have my Befriend Your Limiting Beliefs so you can accomplish things you once thought impossible. That is coming up in the 17th of October. I have done this webinar now twice before, three times before. And well then, hello. Sorry, I don't know what just happened, but it looked like my internet probably went a little wonky. And so hopefully it seems like it's back now. I don't know how stable it is. Leave me a message and let me know how stable or unstable it is. If it looks really, really bad, we're just going to have to postpone, because it is raining here and it's been raining for several days. And sometimes that makes everything go a little wonky. So let me know. Anyway, only now, after I have done this webinar multiple times and really connecting to the different plants that I work with for this webinar, do I feel like it actually has it improves every single time. The wording becomes more clear. The messaging becomes more clear. The message the plants want me to share becomes more clear. And so this is because translating this level of consciousness and understanding into the written word is still so hard. McClintock's story works to partially situate our inquiry into the feeling that makes a scientist's insights possible, and differently so. We, ethnographer and scientists, draw inspiration not only from the more than human connections that give shape to McClintock's empirical practice, but from Keller's accounting of them, her honoring of a scientist's desire to know and represent her knowledge as objective, while choosing to contextualize, embody, and pluralize such pursuits, to add to, rather than subtract from, a scientist's experience of knowing. Building upon McClintock and Keller, we borrow insights from a rich tradition of feminist science studies and sensory-based ethnographic approaches that have laid the grounds for studying not simply the empirical compositions of a science, but the empirical compositions of a scientist. Those studying the effective, more than human dimensions of bodies in experimental formation and the reshaping, involutionary encounter through which the relations between scientists and plants, subjects and objects, feelings and knowing are made susceptible to reconfiguration. We foreground the unfurling of a pea plant decision-making apparatus as a dynamic set of open-ended practices, iteratively refined and reconfigured, as a means of inquiring into the effective, material discursive conditions through which Monica Galliano, a plant scientist, comes to feel and know differently. In doing so, we simultaneously inquire into and offer a different translation of those narrative habits that locate a scientist's insight. the locus of their knowing and making decisions inside of their head as an isolated aha moment or as the objective, unmediated discernments of an apparatus out there. What grows out of this attention of the unfurling apparatus is not only a re-articulation of the empirical grounds of scientific insight, but a different constitution of the empirical, traversing into unexpected experimental terrains. The pea plant invites Galeano to slow down and pay a different kind of attention to empirical attention, a different kind of empirical attention. From one bent on separating feelings and knowing through a perceived distance between observer and observed, words and things, to one that takes all categories of analysis, including empirical, experiential, feeling, and knowing, as contextual, contested, and contingent. From within the wily outgrowths of this apparatus sprouts a situated, more than human response to an event, in which it becomes possible to trace how a scientist's senses are reconfigured through unexpected encounter with pea plant root tips or radicals, an ethics of response we describe as radically empirical. Now, if you remember in Monica Galeano's book, when she goes to, trying to do this. When she goes to do the experiment on pea plants and learning and whether or not plants can, the kind of Pavlov dog study that we talk about so much, when she goes to do this, if you remember, right, she kind of at first thought the experiment wasn't working. And then in a moment of like letting herself go, she gets this understanding realization that for her comes directly from the plants that whisper, "You're looking at it all wrong. You're trying to look at the behavior of the plants through the eyes of animal behavior, of human behavior, and of what we have learned from other species in the animal kingdom." But that's not what plants do. Plants wouldn't behave as a baseline the way an animal would. So you have to reset your baseline. And for her, this was a massive aha moment. Reset your baseline because your expectations are wrong. Your numbers aren't going to come out. Your statistics are not going to look right if you're thinking that we're supposed to behave like animals. But if instead you recognize that we as plants have certain types of behaviors and then look at the deviation that happens from there, you will now start to understand something. And this is what we're looking at here, right? We need to reset our what it means to do empirical study by setting the baseline or setting the understanding of the behavior or of the actions through the eyes of the plant, knowing what the plant is experiencing in order to set up the experiments and the testing that's necessary. Radical, like radical, describes a rupture, a root sprouting from seed. In our experience, or rather the experience with which we found ourselves responsive to, radical simultaneously described an object of empirical inquiry, the primary roots of pea plants, and the morphology of the context, a non-linear feeling around for the creative potentials of experimentation. In this sense, our notion of radical empiricism stems from and builds upon its Jamesian alliteration. Radical empiricism by inquiring into, rather than assuming, the relations that constitute the between of feeling and knowing. As such, our concept of radical empiricism aspires towards what feminist scholar Lindsay Andrew calls a minor empiricism. In refusing the terms of a rational organization of the senses, especially the privileging of vision, right? Remember, we're talking about humans and other animals, not all animals, but some animals, but humans especially focus as our primary sense of vision, not the same for other species. As a fixed, ahistorical, and value-neutral source of knowledge, pea plant radicals invites us to explore a minor awareness of experimental senses, an awareness that unfurls from within their ongoing constitution and reorganization. Radicals are, after the seed, considered to be the plant's first sensory organ, highly sensitive, and rapidly shape-shifting. Radicals are charged with the capacity not only to break through the hard casing of embryonic primordia, but to drop into and navigate the dark unknowns of subterranean Earth. For Darwin and the few who call themselves plant neurobiologists today, whoa, that's a distancing. Anyway, the radical is equipped with neural like signaling capacities, the electrochemical wherewithal to translate messages from their surroundings into a coordinated organismal response. But radicals, if we have come to make sense of them, are masters in sensing, siphoning around through the soil for stories of potential lifeways. Radicals can forecast possible atmospheric futures through the touch of earthly matter. Their power, or rather the mystery of their power, lies in their meristematic indeterminacy, the courageousness, sensitivity of undifferentiated cells to reach into the unknown and gather insight. With Natasha Myers, oh, I still love her so much. We have come to see these million-fold nodes of growth as centers of indetermination, each an ongoing experiment in and with the world, and akin to de Roy's Stolonic inspiration, radicals can lure us out of a transcendent trance and into imminent connection, inviting us to not simply feel for the organism or apparatus, as if it's already out there waiting to be revealed, but to feel around for the possibilities of our milieus, to reroute and ground our senses into the demands of the present for a more response and responsible plant science. That is, a more radically empirical plant science. I'm having fun. How about you? If you have questions if I go and I don't answer something, please let me know in the comments. Just post a comment and let me know. From January to April 2019, Christy Onzik, an anthropologist and feminist scientist studies scholar in training, no longer in training now, because she now has her PhD, had been studying and working as a research assistant with Galeano, an evolutionary ecologist and pioneer in the emerging fields of plant cognition and communication. I told you all this at the very beginning. Galeano's name is perhaps readily recognized by many feminist scientists and science studies readers, particularly those differently interested in plants. Over the last decade, she has published several provocative experimental studies in prestigious journals such as Scientific Reports and Oikologia. Demonstrating preliminary evidence for phenomena such as memory, habituation, and associative learning in plants. Such phenomena have long been thought to require not only a proper nervous system, we talked a lot about nervous system last paper, okay? We can get into the details of the expansion of a nervous system, of the phrasing nervous system, but a highly sophisticated one, further amplifying her knack for what she has described as unthinkable plant science. Galeano has also catalyzed the field of plant bioacoustics. Catalyzed, I don't know. I'm so curious as to what she's doing in that field now, because I have heard pretty much little to nothing, but that doesn't mean anything because I don't hear things as they're happening necessarily anymore. I hear more things once the papers come out. So I'm curious, in which she and very few others have begun to explore the sonic realms of plant communication. It is within this burgeoning and highly experimental field of phytonic soundscapes that our collaborations in cultivating new kinds of empirical senses with plants began to take shape. Since 2016, Onzik has been working to ethnographically ingather a sense of how the novel and still highly experimental and controversial sciences of plant neurobiology, cognition, and communication are being made. If Onzik's studies inquire into scientists attempting to, as Myers has best described it, sense and make sense of plant sensing, we went through that paper, great paper, then the scientist Onzik studies are attempting to make sense of plant sensing through apparatuses common to the domain of cognitive science and neurobiology. As such, there is a peculiar kind of tropic twist that happens in conversations and experiments with these plant scientists and not others. Onzig's field notes evoke stories of plants responding to scientists in ways that not only displace the centrality of the brain and vision from longstanding theories of cognition, which from a human perspective has been put in the forefront, which I think has caused us to really miss out on a lot of other aspects of other ways that we cognitively experience the world that are not necessarily always going through the brain or through our eyesight, but that's another story. Um, in doing so, challenge the cognitive theories embodied and prefigured by the scientists' methods of prehension. Lured into the nutational curiosities of roots and shoots through space-time encounters that challenge the language and techniques of a scientist's a priori cognition, these scientists are, quite publicly, losing grip on those rationalist certainties that sustain their knowledge and their careers. And their career parts is a big one. Remember, I was just saying that Galeano's kind of career suicide with her book. The feelings, the doubts, fears, and hesitations that once lurked in the shadows of their objectifying confidence become not simply palpable, but part of their experiments, grasping for the stabilized explanatory grounds of cognition in the languages and techniques of neuro and animal behavior sciences. These scientists find that no such stable ground exists. The plants once naively assumed to be the objectives of objective investigation become increasingly and unexpectedly responsive to scientists who are no longer certain where the true boundaries of knowing reside. At the time of Onzig's fieldwork, Galeano had recently been awarded a 2-year grant at the University of Sydney. Her position as a natural scientist was unusually co-founded by the Sydney Environment Institute, an interdisciplinary cast of humanities and social science scholars. I think it's a transdisciplinary, not but whatever. Scholars broadly working to collaboratively design and implement strategies for just and sustainable environmental transformation. And while Galeano was considered part of these conversations, she was also given space in a large lab in a stately old biological science building, replete with portraits of Darwin, Cook, and a rich display of 19th century taxidermy where she could continue her experimental work. Shortly after Onzig's arrival, we began building an apparatus designed to test pea plant decision-making behavior in response to the sound of water. The apparatus was to be a more complicated variation of a previous one in which pea plant roots were asked to make choice inside of a two-way Y maze, to either grow towards the sound of water or away. Water is here understood to be an evolutionary necessity and thus desirable resource for peas, and sound being one possible modality through which pea plant roots can sense and locate water. Galeano noticed the germinating pea plant radicals not only grow towards the sound of water, a percentage of the time, but anticipate its direction prior to reaching the node or decision-making obstacle. The radical, having already chosen to grow in the arm of the Y maze that would prove the path of least resistance, the most efficient path towards water. As scientific apparatus, Galeano explains, mazes have generated much insight for cognition and behavioral scientists and are themselves considered amongst the most efficient ways of studying spatial awareness and discriminatory learning behaviors in a variety of animal species. As pea plants have a different bodily organization with different sensory organs, perceptions, and speeds than animals, Galeano has designed a maze out of 2 panes of plexiglass, nylon rope, and a thin layer of soil, and small holes at the center of in which the pea seedling is positioned. Beneath the glass are time-lapse infrared cameras so that Galeano can record the decision-making behaviors of the growing root in the dark. With this new apparatus, Galeano aims to test whether pea roots can make the right decisions to explore efficiently and choose the path of least resistance when navigating the more complex 4-way maze. Based upon the findings of Galeano's prior research, she expects to find that peas can sense the location of the water through sound vibrations and can do so efficiently. That is, they can avoid energetically expensive detours by using sound waves for sensing and deciding upon the most direct path. These are our pea plants that are sprouting. Here are the different mazes, so 4 ways maze. Through her training as an evolutionary ecologist, Galeano has come to accept hold on a second. Sorry. Just before I do something. View. Actually, let me do this. I am so okay. Perfect. Nothing. I needed to see where we were in this process. Okay. Through her training as an evolutionary ecologist, Galeano has come to accept efficiency as a defining parameter for knowing and making right decisions across all life forms, in humans as in peas. As Galeano described it to Onsic, the right decision pivots upon a pea's natural tendency to move through the world teleologically, motivated by an innate desire to achieve fitness and duration in the world. This is important, this piece. And this is embodied as the natural predisposition for making good predictions, for knowing one's world and anticipating one's place within its evolving conditions. Thus, the one who knows best, the one who knows how to make the right decision, is the one who has what it takes to not only sense or feel, but to know where they ought. See, okay, sorry. Let me finish the sentence and then I'll say my things. But to know where they ought to be and how to get there on a path of least resistance. This is the type of place where Galeano gets herself in trouble. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just stating. Because after going to Plants Matter, to the conference that I just went to, I got to hear some of the discussion around the difference between sense and feel. And I feel like putting both of these words here is superfluous. It's like trying to poke a bear. But worse than that, you leave yourself ambiguous, because from the neurobiological world, sensing is considered one thing, feeling is considered another. So when she puts in this sentence to sense or feel, I think that which is probably a deliberate choice, feeling is closer to knowing. And so putting all of these in this way, sense or feel, as if sensing and feeling is the same thing, and then knowing is separate, when kind of from a neurobiological perspective, it's more like sensing is one thing. In other words, I can sense, I can take in information, but then feeling it is kind of knowing it and experiencing it at a different level. It's not kind of a rote response, but instead a processed, so a certain emotional response. And I just feel like putting it here without context leaves you open to attack. And I just don't understand why you would do that. I mean, I get poking the bear, but poke the bear with clarity, not poke the bear in an unclear way. That's just my opinion. Implicit in this way of knowing how right decisions are made is the assumption that not knowing where one is going is, evolutionary speaking, a risky energy expenditure, constitutive of detours, mistakes, or wrong decisions. Wrong decisions are thus revealed not simply in actions of moving away from what is assumed to be the desired stimulus, but by parameters that recognize non-goal directed actions as behaviors lacking predictive value. Those behaviors based on bodily guesses, heuristics, and feelings, not true cognition. How the hell do you ever measure any of this from a plant or from any animal that doesn't speak? In the design of this experiment, wrong decisions take on the appearance of pea roots growing in a variety of directions, or those that make detours before finding the clear path. But is that a wrong decision? I don't know. There's a whole heck of a lot of assumptions in here, and I'm not understanding why they would make these assumptions. Early in the construction of the mazes, Galeano began to feel overwhelmed by the particular constraints and affordances of the lab. While it offered her science the possibility of controlled temperatures, soundproof isolation, and sterile conditions, it also espoused the privilege of generating waste in the name of science. As we unpacked the plexiglass of her mazes, engineered according to her specifications, we found ourselves surrounded by plastic wrap and styrofoam boxes, materials of short use and long-term terrestrial consequences. An unbearable sense of ethical disconnect imposed upon Galeano's ecologist senses, demanding of her to change course. Oh, boy, do I understand that. Without much hesitation and the support of her new colleagues, we packed up the mazes, water tanks, cameras, and PCs into the back of her van and headed north to the subtropical part of New South Wales. We found ourselves a house surrounded by the forest, crawling with spiders, newts, and snakes, and equipped with a large backyard shed, spacious and barren enough to perform as Galliano's new lab. We began setting up the pea plant decision-making apparatus immediately so as not to waste any more time on her short contract. We also incorporated the styrofoam boxes into the apparatus itself so as not to waste any more materials. The experiment, I don't understand I understand the styrofoam and the waste, but why would you go to a non-controlled area? Am I missing something? You went to a non-controlled area, which is just going to bring more doubt into your experimentation. For what goal? It doesn't express the goal. What was the overwhelm? The experiment began with what appeared to be several weeks of successful piloting. The initial design was based on two groups. The treatment group, i.e. water sound, is randomly assigned and applied to one of the four arms for each replicate maze. And the control group, no sound is applied. All arms are intended to be equal, and hence seedlings are expected to grow randomly into any one of the arms. As the experimentation proceeded to testing phase, after approximately 5 days of seed germination, something unexpected arose. When removing the plexiglass covering to peer at the growing roots beneath, Galliano noticed that almost all pea plants in their individual mazes, both those in the control and treatment groups, were making the same decision. Irrespective of treatment, but far from random, the young root trips are responding to a stimulus, albeit not the one provided by Galliano. But you took it out of the control. Look, I am not always for controlled experiments because I do think that they take away from stuff. So, but I think you need a control in the controlled experiments to understand what it, just keep reading. The apparatus worked to generate a collectively oriented behavior of the young pea plants, though Galliano did not know or control for this decision. Oh, that's Christy. Okay. Unfurling expectations. Galliano's initial response to the unexpected performance of the apparatus was what she described as visceral gut feeling of frustration, a frustration that comes with the sense that she, not the peas, had failed to know correctly. In previous studies, she had considered herself successful and knowledgeable after demonstrating that pea roots sense and make the right decisions by growing efficiently towards the sound of water. So what went wrong with her design of the apparatus? Where did she go wrong? Rather than assessing all the details in which Galliano's experiment could be rationalized as wrong, we explore how it is that Galliano came to feel and know the response of the apparatus as the effect of her own cause, her own wrongdoing. In Meeting the Universe Halfway, Karen Barad describes a situation in which a scientist's apparatus becomes palpable as a dynamic set of open-ended practices, iteratively refined and reconfigured, rather than a mere instrument of observation. She gives the example of Otto Stern and Walter Gerlach's magnetic spatialization experiment, in which a simple exaltation rich in the sulfic residue of cheap cigars, the only kind Stern could afford, left its mark on a silver plate. So she became the experiment. Yeah, that's pretty much what's happening. She became, which now I'm so confused because in Thus Spoke the Plant, she kind of goes through the same process. And so this is not the same experiment because that was the Y maze experiment. So is this maybe part of her process too? The way that, in other words, she starts off very scientifically focused, then sees that everything goes in a different way of her expectations, and then sort of freaks out, becomes part of the we need to keep reading. We need to keep reading because I'm confused. In doing so, the liveliness of the apparatus was revealed to Stern, and evidence for a different phenomenon, the angular momentum of the electron. A difference that was previously inconceivable became possible. For Barad, the example of Stern's cheap cigar makes poignant the material discursive natures, the indeterminate and dynamically shape-shifting potentials of an apparatus. The cigar is, in Barad's rendering, a condensation or a nodal point of the workings of other apparatuses, including class, nationalism, economics, and gender, all of which are part of the Stern-Galak apparatus. Hold on, I'm processing. As Barad's account works to demonstrate, scientists tend to take for granted that the outside boundaries of a apparatus end at some obvious visual terminus, or the boundary circumscribes only that set of items a scientist learned to list under equipment during lab exercises in science class. They tend to trust the habits of their training and a training that encourages an immediate grasp of the apparatus in its entirety. Such habits, Barad suggests, make a scientist susceptible to preconceptions. Now we're getting somewhere. Now I'm starting to understand. They work to manage uncertainty by diverting attention away from the lively, agental propensities of matter and the creative potencies of silver and sulfide, or in our case, a laboratory porousness made perceptible and significant through radical recalcitrance, and focusing attention on the stabilizing forces of past experience. These are embodied conceptions of how an apparatus and a scientist entangled with the habits of another ought to perform. And this is the reason why experiments, whomever funds experiments, should never fund one. In other words, doing some experiment once almost doesn't give you enough, because in that one, you almost learn what could be all the other factors involved. And I think we should just be, because you know what, this type of experiment would have been great to do there, also in the lab, probably in another like live setting, to see what is different and what changes so that you can compare and contrast and have a better understanding of what the real behavior of pea plants are. Because we don't know enough about plants to just have one experiment and think we understand. And this is what, in some ways, Galeano's being digged on a constant basis, because she goes around talking about learning and all these different aspects. We do too. We quote her scientific experiments all the time, but it's one experiment, and there could be other factors because the whole concepts that she's bringing into being are so new. In Galeano's initial response, we trace the sense of success and failure, the right and wrong outcomes of her experiment pivot upon a habit of knowing in which Galeano considers herself solely responsible for divining and predicting all possible parameters and outcomes of the apparatus. This is what I was saying. This is a habit that, in facing the unexpected, affects a feeling of frustration and concomitant story of individual failure. In this response, feeling corresponds to a wrong kind of knowing, of being uncertain and lacking control, which is not wrong. The right kind of knowing is, like that inscribed into the design of the apparatus, an achievement of goal-directed foresight or planned action. Wrong. The goal, the right answer, is to have learned something. It takes shape as an assumed clear line of intent where action proceeds from a plan made inside of an actor's body, inside of the scientist. I'm going to use mind. I'm not going to use head. Which I'm surprised they use it. Such explorations are, to Galeano's disciplined senses, not only inefficient, but also difficult to articulate and prove as objectively knowable. These are expressions of feeling bodies whose experiences of knowing are porous to the milieus in ways that run the risk of expending too much energy. In this narrative, such bodies lack the ability to transcend the temporality of the present into the realm of the future abstract, the realm in which, according to the design of Galeano's apparatus, and that learned through her training, is what constitutes true knowing, and the conditions in which true knowledge of the world can be presented. Oh, that's an interesting concept. Since she's part of the experiment now, it becomes impossible for others to duplicate and either confirm or disprove. Not only that, in order for her to really even replicate it herself, she has to monitor her own state and know what state was she in which these feelings came into effect, and how could those feelings have affected the plant. When I did the my study into the effects of plant music on human health, one of the most difficult pieces of the design of the experiment was actually two pieces. One was the plant where would we put the plant? Because in the case of when the person was listening to the true music, the plant was in the room. That's kind of a given, right? But is it? Because if it's the plant music that's creating it, if you have the plant in the room, doesn't that run the risk that it's actually the plant acting on the human directly and not the music of the plant acting on the human's response? But more importantly, when we were playing back recorded music, in order to not have the plant's presence be part of the factor, should the plant be in the room? And then you run the risk that if there is a positive response, it all comes from the plant and it's not about the music at all. Or should you take the plant out of the room in order for us to at least narrow it down that it's either the plant's presence or the music? Do you see what I'm saying? The control group is not so easy to do. And had we had more funding, we would have probably created a whole set of conditions. But especially even the human, myself, I had to disappear. I tried to go, luckily the place where we were at, I was way down the hall, hopefully outside of the purview at all, because if I was nearby, it's just too risky that I'm going to affect this. So Galliano has to measure herself if she's ever going to repeat this experiment. In this narrative, such bodies lack the ability to transcend the temporality of the present into the realm of the future abstract, the realm in which, according to the design of Galliano's apparatus, and that learned through her training, is what constitutes true knowing, and the conditions in which knowledge of the world can be presented. These feelings of wrong kinds of knowing as disciplined senses of, or what Barrard calls habits, can be traced from within the material discursive relations of a highly competitive evolutionary ecology department, where Galliano was trained to feel that having what it takes to be a good scientist is a natural predisposition. In their ethnographic studies of physics and protein crystallographers, respectively, anthropologists Sharon Traweek and Natasha Myers propose that what comes to count as natural predispositions are social-technical achievements embodied in time through ongoing practice and subject to change through technological, material, and socio-historical contingencies. We briefly explore some of the material discursive practices through which Galliano became entrained to a particular narrative of knowing, through which Galliano learned to embody an image of herself as a scientist already predisposed to making those decisions that lead to the most efficient or immediate grasp of an apparatus and its outcomes, towards generating knowledge in objectively definable or probabilistic terms. From within Galliano's response, we can trace the subtle clues of her teachers and peers, iteratively articulating and reinforcing the conditions in which she was put to the test as fit or not to know as a scientist. Through coursework and lessons to familiarize herself with her biases or subjective feelings, Galliano embodied the distancing protocols of an objective observer, developing what was presumed to be an effectively neutral stance between herself and her apparatus. Yeah, good luck on that. Repeated practicing on checking biases, incorporating cameras as technologies to stand in support or as counter to her potentially fallible vision, searching for ways in which one's social body, the influences of unscientific experience might get in the way of proper knowing, aggregate and condense to become experimental habits. Through her training, she became to make sense of herself as either already having what it takes to accurately and efficiently predict and demarcate the parameters of a knowable outcome or not. And isn't that already in and of itself a bias? Feeling emerges from within this narrative as part of this realm of subjective bias. As subjective, it formulates an experience of knowing that, while at the times insightful, cannot be taken seriously or made legible as a true form of knowing, or not the kind of knowing through which objectively right decisions get made. In revealing some of the material discursive compositions of Galliano's apparatus, the narrative of knowing effectively entrained into her practice as a natural predisposition, we work not to reduce such sensory dexterities, such habits of feelings for knowing objectively, to become in being inherently wrong. Rather, in foregrounding the feelings made possible by encounters with an unexpected, we suggest that feeling is neither antithetical or to the objectively knowing, nor is it in a sense or experience that a scientist has and that may prove insightful at times. Rather, we seek to demonstrate how feeling is a phenomenon both effectively constituted by and constitutive of a particular habit of scientific knowing experience. And like all habits, such feelings are susceptible to reconfiguration, made and unmade on the level of immanence and radical experience. From within the material discursive contingencies of an apparatus in which it becomes possible for Galeano to feel, to sense, and make sense of herself as a failure, insight reaches out like the roots of the pea, luring us into experimenting with the indeterminacies of an apparatus as the grounds for a radically empirical plant science. There's a frick ton there to unpack. I don't know. I feel like they're still missing. It just feels like this is a feeling. It's just a feel. It feels like something's missing. I think that there's a missing piece, which is the relationship with the plant. It still feels like there's missing there. They're focusing all of this on Galeano's sense of understanding and knowledge, which definitely affects it. But again, if she's part of the experiment, where is the interaction with the pea plants themselves? If she believes in plant communication in the sense that plants communicate in different ways and therefore can affect the human being, then this interaction also, just her being the observer, it's a basic physics question, right? She is a part now of the experiment. Feeling around of the apparatus. In Getting Lost, feminist scientist and science studies scholars Patty Lather proposes a practice of learning to work within the ruins of science, despite its many disappointments. Like Donna Haraway's invitation to stay with the trouble, Lather asks of us to renegotiate the conceptual limitations of our scientific ruins, suggesting that terms understood as no longer fulfilling their promise do not become useless. On the contrary, their very failures become provisional grounds and new uses are derived. Yes, I am where. That's where I am. On the contrary, in some ways, you shouldn't even go into it with a promise. You should go into it with the idea that this is what I want to test, but without an understanding or a belief system that this is going to work or not going to work. Because even the not working is a form of working from an experimental perspective. In their preferring not to respond, or at least not to respond in the right way, the pea plant roots invite us to slow down and pay a different kind of attention to the limits and necessary misfirings of an unfurling pea plant's decision-making apparatus. From within the mess of scientists' newfound experimental entanglements, it becomes possible to not only reimagine Galeano as the one who knows designs and speak for the performance of the peas, but to translate such imaging into more than human empirical formations. Turning towards the undetermined, albeit collectively shared interests of the peas, Galeano, like the peas, begins to feel around for the potentials of a new possible apparatus, one in which the design, performance, and outcome are no longer constrained to the visible or knowable spectrum of Galeano's prior training, but open to radically empirical formulations. The guiding inquiry is thus no longer concerned with whether or not the individual plants respond to the sound of water within their individual mazes, efficiently or aimlessly, but with what it becomes possible to know within the porous and indeterminate contingencies of that apparatus. Oh, give me 1 second. I am being summoned, and I have to tell the person who is summoning me that I am not available. I told you I have students around. They don't know. Oh, hold on. My students don't understand. So I have to tell them. And of course, everything is just acting. My technology is really acting weird today. Like I'm trying to type something and it's not typing. Isn't that awesome? Oh, great. As I'm trying to tell somebody that I am, there we go, 5. All right, sorry about that. My interruptions of interruptions of interruptions. Okay. Ugh. In doing so, Galliano becomes a scientist whose knowing is made possible by not simply losing herself, but by becoming herself, a scientist who knows that she knows nothing. Isn't that like kind of what Einstein said? Differently. For her capacity to know is no longer trapped inside her body as a natural predisposition, revealing itself as either right or wrong, objective or subjective, efficient or aimless. Rather, in feeling herself as a failure in response to the unexpected outgrowth of the apparatus, Galliano begins to feel herself as part of its empirical formulations. As so, oh, forget it, man. This is a fallacy, in my opinion. She's not neutral. You're supposed to be neutral. Yeah, you're supposed to be neutral to a certain extent, but the way you're taught is you have to create an experiment that says, I want to show this outcome. And therefore, I'm rooting for that outcome. So therefore, I'm looking for evidence that proves this outcome. Rather than I'm creating this type of experiment and I don't know what the outcome is going to be, and I'm going to go look at the outcome. We're not taught that kind of science. We're not funded with that kind of science. So yeah, you're right. You are always overshadowed by your own biases. The best you can do right now with the way the systems are is to be able to call out those biases so that at least you can filter out for as many as possible, but also leave space for them in the experimental method. Let's see, where are we? From within the disorienting space of no longer being the one who knows, the feelings of being immersed within one's apparatus, the boundaries between scientist and object, knower and that which is to be known are unclear. Galliano is absorbed into an unexpected experimental relation with the P's, where the boundaries between the two are subject to radically empirical innovation. For a scientist, insight, her capacity to know, is not a matter of aha or objective revelation, but a matter of feeling around, a matter of unfurling in time. I agree with this metaphor. This is a much better metaphor. Although the aha moment comes, because there is sometimes when you just open yourself and you just allow something to come in and it's there. An intimate, more than human relation, a matter of becoming responsive to asynchronous outgrowths and to the inevitable sprouting and spreadings of unexpected, to those radical ruptures in rational conformity in which new possible plants and scientists take shape. From within these newly responsive iterations of the apparatus, the individual pea seedlings are still positioned within individual mazes, but the four arms are now reduced to two, with both arms oriented towards the common, albeit still unknown, a stimulus. The difference between the treatment group and the control is constituted by a small roadblock. The roadblock, a rectangular cutting of polystyrene foam, is randomly assigned and placed at the entrance of one or two arms to eat. How does this change the experiment? What? By adding a roadblock between the pea plants and their desired direction, Galliano is interested in observing how plants decide the best route to reach a stimulus. A, are they able to identify the arm of the maze with no obstruction before arriving to it? And would they change the direction once the obstacle is encountered, or would they attempt to overcome it? Neither decision is more right or wrong, better experiment in that aspect. Rather, Galliano is now interested in observing, this is what we were saying before, the spatial and temporal patterns that arise from the root collective, including pea roots. No. Including, where are we? Pea roots. Where did my pea roots go? Sorry. Maze boundaries and roadblocks. Craziness. My thing is really going nuts. The root collective, including pea roots, maze boundaries, and roadblocks, time-lapse recording, stimulus A, and the in situ. This is an intra-active cultivations of the apparatus through which Galliano 2 is figured. Her recordings and observations are not only generated in response to the direction of the pea roots' growth and whether they reach the target of the maze, i.e., can the pea make right decisions, but also how roots move and traverse through soils in relation to the shifting boundaries of the maze, i.e., the relational encounters through which the pea roots are responding to different constraints and affordances between the maze. Cultivating a heightened attention to the qualities of the medium through which knowing can be felt or experienced as knowledge. The transport panes of glass through which both the scientist and the camera can visualize the pea plant's roots inside the maze. Galliano relinquishes the capacity to claim unmediated transparency to an objective, discerned experiment. Instead, the panes of plexiglass, the soil, the cameras, the pea roots growing towards an unknown stimulus activate a vision beyond the visible, a vision that both conducts and challenges the fantastic projections that form the basis for Galeano's scientific investigation into pea plant decision making. In the story, the phenomenon of feeling, knowing, and making decisions originate not in the presumably unmediated experience of a natural or inherent predisposition, but out of an interactive and effective prehension of the moving, differentiating qualities of the apparatus. The displacement of the soil by growing roots, the light diffracting through the lens of the camera, the sonic vibrations of water, the sonic vibrations of the camera, because believe it or not, they do make sounds. The light diffracting through the lens of the camera, the emanations of an unknown, albeit significant signal somewhere beyond the walls of the lab, and Galeano's trained senses expanding the feeling around for the potentials of a living, growing, unfurling apparatus. The conclusion is Galeano's radically empirical inquiry remain ongoing, though not in any form easily translated into the representational demands of science. The peas continue to lure her into feelings for the creative outgrowths of an apparatus, spurning a curiosity in more porous, ecologically responsive, and responsible modes of experimentation. Having since expanded into meshwork greenhouse adjacent to the lab, and therefore into an unruly bounds of the vegetal garden, the once sterile expectations of a properly controlled apparatus have given way to the fervor of the surrounding forest, to the cacophony of birds and insects, the fluctuations of light, moisture, wind, etc. The apparatus through which Galeano's insights become possible is subject to dynamically more than human composition. The perceptions of both Galeano and the peas are a matter of perpetual cultivation. And while such radically empirical modes of experimentation have the potential to provoke new insights about how scientists come to feel around for knowing differently, it nonetheless proves difficult for a scientist charged with the task of generating replicable data in a timely manner. In pointing to the limitations of, and this is a really big problem, right? It's the whole funding issue. I don't have time. I have to produce. I have to make something. It has to be a response. It has to be within certain perspectives. In pointing to the limitations of tacit conditioning of a scientist's knowledge-making habits, the P's invite us to slow down and feel around the new possible conditions through which science can be made. While the P's point away from the expected, from the conventions of a priori knowing, they do not point to something else out there waiting to be revealed. That is, as we see it, the radically empirical invitation is not simply a reformulation of the scientist's question, but a reconstruction of the very terms through which a scientist's questions become possible. Not simply a renewed epistemic attention to the scientist's feeling body, but an interest in the material discursive histories through which the very concept of feeling is made possible within the empirical practices of a scientist. In accepting such an invitation, we endeavor to expand our potentials for response. Oh, I am getting to the end of it. Sorry about this, because I'm getting called on a... As a minor empiricism, our radically empirical proposition is neither better nor worse, more right or wrong, but a different way to go about crafting inquiries into the sensorial reconfigurations of knowing. From within the creative unfurlings of an apparatus in an unexpected formation, it becomes possible to amplify the responsive potentials for radical and all kinds of radically empirical means of knowledge, of knowing, evoking different translations of a scientist's detours their feelings around an apparatus without a clear knowing of what's to come, not as wrong, but perhaps imminent, to the act of novel inquiry, extending the invitation to feel around for, and therefore about knowing plants, scientists, and all kinds of feelers and knowers differently. Oh, I have so much I want to say to this, and now I'm realizing that I didn't give myself enough time. Oh, I'm so frustrated right now. Okay, folks, I am going to come back on this one because there is just so many things I want to say, but I really need to process it. There is a lot of things in here that are different, and I need to process. I need to process, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. When I publish this, I will probably add some extra thoughts to it because I need to think about it. I need to think about it. There's just a lot in here to process. So how she becomes a part of the experiment, what she does with that, where she goes with it. So I'm going to come back to this because right now, unfortunately, as usual, I didn't give enough time. So I will do that. So I'm going to close this up right here, but I will put in my notes, my show notes when I publish this. I'm going to add more of my thoughts. So until then, Remember to resist the urge. Remember, resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. And we will come back and we will finish this discussion. All right. I'll see you later.